up rails. Whole stretches of railway line disappeared under the drifting snow. This London-bound train stood with its passengers for hours in a deep cutting a few miles north of Tunbridge Wells, slowly gathering its own covering of snow.
Tracks was shorting out the controls of this level crossing, falsely indicating a train was coming. And staff have been at full stretch chipping ice off the metro system's 150 sets of points. What proportion of trains are you managing to run?
Something like 60 to 70%.
Would you consider that's a good figure?
I think that's pretty good in view of the battle we've got on.
Is it likely to go up or go down in the future?
Well, we're struggling to hold it.
The motorists of Kent came in.
Plough unit.
In Sheffield, this crowded commuter train was held up for an hour by frozen points. While the driver telephoned for help, the passengers decided their ordeal had gone on long enough. Against all the rules, they abandoned their train and scrambled up the bankside. People who'd taken to the train to avoid the chaos on the roads found themselves looking for a bus after all. The Neville Hill depot in Leeds is where frozen trains come to be defrosted. High-speed intercities cover 1,000 miles a day, and at 125 miles an hour, the wind chill factor is around -40 centigrade. Ice in the engine cripples the electrics and jams the brakes on, so at the end of each day begins the miserable 8-hour job of removing several hundredweight of iron-hard ice till the train is ready for another winter's day.
With most rural roads in Norfolk blocked by snow, a pregnant woman had to be airlifted 20 miles to Norwich in an RAF helicopter.
But early this afternoon, a snowplough was sent along to clear the line. However, one train travelling towards Newcastle had battled its way through already, despite drifts which in some places were up to 8 feet deep.
Well, those passengers weren't the only ones facing delays on the railways. British Rail staff in Newcastle have been inundated with calls as they try to keep the network open. It's been a frustrating day for rail staff and commuter alike.
At their regional headquarters in Newcastle, British Rail insisted they were doing everything possible to keep at least a restricted service going. The Hartlepool-Sunderland line was still blocked, half the local services elsewhere were cancelled, intercity trains were running 3 hours late, and you couldn't get north of Edinburgh. Nevertheless, British Rail pointed out that in many cases they were getting through when it was impossible by road. This was the 8 a.m. 12-carriage train to Poole in Dorset, leaving 2 hours late at 10 and probably about to suffer further delays. But BR said it was running thanks to teams who'd worked through the night to clear the points.
British Rail information?
There will be trains running. We can't give you any specific timings at the moment. You just have to come and take a chance.
Well, I can't give you...
Telephone callers got the message if they could get through. Normally this information centre takes 2,000 calls a day. Now it's about 10 times that number, and even with extra staff in here, the situation was described as pandemonium. As the big freeze-up continued, BR admitted nerves were getting frayed. Some members of the public had, they said, been less than understanding.
Good morning, British Rail.
Passengers actually on the trains, they're only too happy to be somewhere warm and they're getting there eventually. I think the problem comes when they're actually here on the station wanting information. We can only give a limited amount of information that's available at the time, and our staff are getting rather thwarted by some of the public's reactions. Understandable, but we've got to realise that, again, they can only give the information they've got. And I just ask members of the public to at least give a little bit of thought to the person behind the counter. We've had staff going home in tears, and, you know, it's not very good at all for morale. They're trying their best, and I just ask the public to be as sympathetic as they can towards us, please.
But the passengers who arrived in Plymouth from Newcastle this lunchtime had the longest delay of all. Their train was 18 hours late, and the passengers had spent more than a day on their journey.
The Newcastle to Plymouth Express left Newcastle around 10 o'clock yesterday morning. It arrived in Plymouth shortly after midday today. Many of the passengers had spent the full 26 hours on board, and they weren't happy.
It was the children that suffered. It was trying to get hot water for our bottles because they ran out of hot water. The boiler broke down, and then the lights went off and the heating went off. So it was the children that suffered, really.
The thing that annoyed me was that we weren't informed that often as to what was happening and when we would arrive, that kind of thing.
What did you do to pass the time?
I read a book. I was just as well I brought it along with me. It's 800 pages long.
Have you finished it now?
Just about.
We do our best in bad weather conditions, but the conditions we experienced on that stretch of track were a lot worse than we would normally encounter. And we did our very best, but we've been caught short throughout the whole of the country with extremely bad conditions.
The Prince of
Nearly 23 hours after setting off. Frozen points at Gloucester and drifting snow in Bristol had conspired to keep the train stationary for around 16 hours. This man had been on for the whole trip.
It should never have happened. They let us go so far, then we stopped. We just stayed there.
It's the children that suffered. It was trying to get hot water for our bottles because they ran out of hot water. The boiler broke down, and then the lights went off and the heating went off. So it was the children that suffered, really.
It seems that Britain always gets caught out. Every year we have the same problems. It doesn't seem that way in the continent.